In Lesson 6, we talked about scope and how JavaScript is dependent upon the global scope, but we didn't talk about how we can access that global scope if we need to. Well, we are going to talk about that in this lesson. In the browser, we have a object called window, and this is our global scope. Whenever we create a global variable or function, it's actually being added to our global scope, which is this window object. So I'm going to create a variable called foo. I'm going to give it a value of 10. This is a global variable. It is declared outside of any other function. So what we actually do is we create a foo variable that is actually a property of the window object. So we can create one here, and then we can access it with window.foo. Now, however, we have accessed it without using the window and the dot, and that's because window is always implied. We don't have to use it, and in fact, we shouldn't use it unless if we absolutely have to. And one of the instances of when we have to is in an instance like this. We have a function called myFunction, and then we have a variable called bar, which we assign the value of 1. And then we have a local variable called foo, which we will assign bar plus 2. Now remember from lesson 6 that whenever we have a local variable with the same name as a global variable, this variable within this local scope is used. So if we were going to use foo, such as var foo2 equals foo plus 5, we are actually using the value of foo here, which is 3, and then adding it to 5, which will be 8. Well, what if we wanted to use the global foo variable instead of the local one here? Well, we could do that by specifying window. Because window is our global object, this foo variable is actually a property of our window object. We can access it by using window.foo. So now this code actually gets 10 and then adds 5 to it, so this is 15. And the same concept is true for global functions. We can access them through the window object, myFunction, and we can see here that IntelliSense is showing us that we can, in fact, execute myFunction as a method of the window object. So we can do that, and this executes this function here because myFunction is global. Now, for the most part, we do want to omit the window. We only want to use it when we absolutely have to, such as the case here whenever we wanted to use the global foo as opposed to the local foo. So now let's take this concept of window being our global object and examining some other things that we have used throughout the previous lessons. The first is the alert function. We have used this quite extensively through all of our lessons because it's a great way to show what our code is doing. Well, this is actually a method of the window object because window is always applied. So we have actually been calling window.alert whenever we have specified just alert. The same is true for prompt. Whenever we wanted to get some input from the user and we have used the prompt method, or the prompt function, it is actually called the prompt method because it is a method of the window object. There's also another dialog box that we can use within our code called confirm, and this allows us to pose a question to a user. Let's say, do you want to go to Google? And whenever this code executes, it's actually going to show a dialog box to the user with this question, and it will have an OK and a cancel button. And if the user clicks OK, then confirm returns true. If the user clicks cancel, then it returns false. So let's actually just see what this looks like within the browser. And see, here we have a confirm box. Do you want to go to Google? Of course, this code isn't really doing anything, so if I press OK, nothing's going to happen. Well, let's add some code so that we actually do something when the user does press OK. And we are going to do this within the try it section. So since this returns a true or false value, let's put it within an if statement. And let's also add an else. Now, we want to take the user to google.com if they click yes. So we are going to use an object, or it's actually a property of the window object called location. It itself is an object. And since it is a part of the window object, we can omit window. So we want location, and we are going to use, or we are just going to assign it a new value of http://www.google.com. Now we could also use a property of this called href, but just setting location is good enough. Now, if the user clicks false, we want to reload the current page, and we can do that once again with the location object. It has a method called reload, and we can pass it either nothing, or we can pass it a Boolean value. Now, if we don't pass it anything, then it's going to reload the web page that we have already in our browser's cache. If we specify true, then it's going to go out and reload the web page by getting everything from the server again. So if we want a hard refresh, then we can just specify true, and that's what we are going to do here. So let's go and see this in action within our browser. Let's refresh the page. We are getting a confirmed dialog box. Now, if I press OK, it's going to take us to google.com. But if I press cancel, it's going to reload the page, which will essentially execute this code again. So we kind of put ourselves into a loop until we press OK. So here I am pressing cancel, and it's reloading the page and executing the same JavaScript over and over again. But whenever I press OK, it's going to take us to google.com. So the window object is our global object, but it also serves as an interface that we can use to modify the actual window within the browser. And we will look at that in Lesson 11.